There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination, an area in which we call the Twilight Zone.
Hello and welcome to the live stream edition of the Duras Sisters podcast. This is our spooky tandem episode. We are so excited to go live and talk about the Twilight Zone episodes that feature the original series cast of Star Trek. Rihanna, thank you for that lovely introduction. I felt really like it set the tone.
Thank you. That is my favorite of the three intros, so I had to memorize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thank you all for coming and watching today. We decided for the month of October to just do as many spooky things as we possibly can. You will know that we are in the middle of our spooky series right now. For you, no episodes have been released yet. You're going to get the first one tomorrow. We are recording Next Generation tomorrow, and you are going to be receiving that in the middle of the week. So we're trying to smash in as many Halloween episodes as we can before actually Halloween happens. So this live stream event right now is the first of our live streams. Next week, we are also going to be carving pumpkins. So thank you for being spooky with us. Rihanna, I can tell that you are in the spooky spirit because of your outfit.
Yes, I got my full body skeleton here. Ashlyn, I also love your skeletons.
Thank you. I also want everyone to note that this is DeForest Kelly.
So beautiful.
And it looks like you have your pride pin
yes,
on.
The one you got for me. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, why else would I bring it up?
Yeah, of course. Ashlyn, I am so excited that we are doing an episode like this. It's so rare that we get to talk about not Star Trek in our Star Trek podcast, obviously. We don't do it very often because Star Trek is the name of the game. But we wanted to do something spooky adjacent, and this is just absolutely like Star Trek adjacent, spooky perfectness. The Twilight Zone like pretty much made Star Trek what it is. So we felt like it was the perfect way to invite both of the fandoms into the mix.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Rihanna, you are our expert, I would say, on the podcast between the two of us on the Twilight Zone. But I know that both of us grew up watching the Twilight Zone. Our dad had it on all the time.
Yeah.
And especially late at night when you're getting tired and ready to go to bed, and then you're very scared.
Very amped. Yeah.
Watching a Twilight Zone episode. So Rihanna, can you talk about like what the Twilight Zone has meant in your life and like your relationship with it?
Yeah, it's actually a super important show in my life. And it's funny because it's not something I like reference day to day, or it's not like I'm, like reading Twilight Zone fanfic or something. I'm not like that crazy, but it's still such an important show to me because one, like you said, we would watch it with our dad growing up. And I remember just the like thrill of it, being completely terrified, but also really intrigued by it. And so finally, when I went to college and had a bunch of downtime, but also not, you're so busy in college until you can like binge an entire show. And I binged the entirety of the Twilight Zone while it was still on Netflix. And there is something so special about this show. It really is like the trailblazing sci-fi horror show of the time. It's coming off the tail of Alfred Hitchcock, of those kind of scary, suspenseful thriller type movies, but it's turning into like a 20-minute show. And the thing I also really respect and appreciate about the Twilight Zone is that it's got its own individual stories. You do not have to watch in order by any means, as we did today. We're certainly not watching in order. It's really cool because it's actually kind of what I think Black Mirror got its inspiration from, and what so many shows after gets inspiration from. I'm thinking even The X-Files. My dad and I binged that entire show back when I was in high school. And I think partially because we both love the Twilight Zone and we loved that kind of genre of fiction, like that horror sci-fi element, there's something so niche and special about it, and that creates like some of the best shows on television. Like we're talking Star Trek, X-Files, and The Twilight Zone. Like those are insane. Those are like god tier shows, and they're all like have such a special place in my heart. And so I just think the Twilight Zone, especially for Star Trek, really paved the way and created, a lot of the tropes that we have in Trek is from the Twilight Zone, actually, and it's not actually TOS originated.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Rihanna. I'm thinking about all the other shows that were on at the time, and I think something that really stands out to me and makes Twilight Zone different, as you said, very episodic. There's no
Mhm.
continuity except Rod Sterling is
Yes.
the
Oh,
only continuity we
it's
need
amazing.
is he's always going to appear in his very dapper suit in
Yes.
even if it's in like a totally different era. He could be like in the middle of a jungle and then here's Rod
Yeah.
Stewart.
Yeah.
But
Rod
I think
Sterling, Rod Stewart.
Rod
That would be
Stewart.
amazing if he just appeared. Could you imagine?
Oh my god, that sounds like we're in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
Oh my god,
Absolutely.
Rod Sterling. Yikes. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yes, well, something that I think makes it so good is the simplicity
Mhm.
because like the writing is so great and it's just this small storyline that lasts 20, 25 minutes. Some of them are an hour, some of them are
Mhm.
50 minutes. Um and it just focuses on one or two people for the most part who's
Yeah.
going through something that is life changing in a lot of cases or can really shape the direction of their lives. So it's just a snapshot, it's kind of like a slice of life,
Yeah, but
but
scary. Yeah.
scary and very memorable. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious, Ashlyn, do you remember the first episode of The Twilight Zone you ever saw?
Um, sorry, I'm reading Michelle's comment. I just called to
To say,
say I
"I
love
love
you.
you."
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Twilight Zone.
Thank you, Rod Stewart, for stopping by. Um, okay, so I don't remember the first episode. I was very young when I watched The Twilight Zone with Dad. I mean, it was around the same era that he was watching Star Trek too. So I think in
Yeah,
my mind,
and
like,
MASH kind of too, like
oh,
that whole
oh
all of
yeah,
the everything on TV Land, essentially.
TV Land, Andy Griffith Show. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah,
like
totally.
we're folding laundry, watching all of these shows.
Mhm.
I'm watching like the helicopter come is oh god, I'm just having MASH flashbacks. Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
um so the one that really stands out to me though, I don't even remember the title of it, but there's one where this guy like he's in this small town, it's like every episode,
Yeah,
and it turns out that he's the last person on Earth, and
yeah,
he's
I think
just
it's called The Last
slowly
Man on Earth or something.
okay, yeah, he's slowly losing his mind, and he's, like, hallucinating that these people are here, and then, he realizes at the end that he's not, and that one really freaked me out because you're, like, so invested in this guy, and at first you're like, "Oh, I don't really care about him," and then as you go, you're, like, learning more about him, and then
Mhm.
you realize he's all alone, and the idea of, like, being in that situation really freaked me out. I think I had a nightmare after
Yeah.
that episode. Do you
Yeah,
have one for you that stands out?
I mean, that was my same answer. That was the first
Mm,
one I think I remember vividly, but also I think another one that really freaked me out was again not going to remember the title, but there was three of them, and they thought that they were taking the space flight, and they thought that they made it to Mars or some planet. Hi, giraffe.
hi, giraffe.
uh,
Hello.
um, and they like think that they've landed, but then they start like fighting against each other, and then they end up all killing each other, and it turns out they never left orbit and they're still on Earth, and they thought that they were stranded on Mars, that like something had gone wrong. So this is something that I also got to say about the Twilight Zone that is just magnificent, is the fact that like I have never been able to guess an ending of the Twilight Zone. Like sometimes, in a Star Trek episode, you're like, oh yeah, this is going to be an evil computer. And then it is, because you're kind of like, okay, yeah, that this is the writing that's going on. But I think the writing for the Twilight Zone was always so unique and always had that incredible twist at the end where you're just like, oh my God, like I would have never guessed that this would have gone this way. And it's just really cool to think about like having that many episodes where I cannot guess the ending.
Well, I think because there was no constraints. You can
Yeah.
kill whoever you want. because they're not going to be returning the next week. Like,
Exactly.
there's no stakes. It's just about telling a great story. And I think that's like a huge factor of why the show is so good. With Star Trek, yeah, it's an evil computer. You can't kill Kirk. Like,
Yeah, exactly. That's
yeah,
so
or
true.
if you do, you got to bring him back. So,
He'll be back by the end of the episode. Yeah. That's a
yeah.
very good point. I'm gonna read Michelle's comment and said the ooh and the freaky dollhouse one. Oh, this is bringing up spooky memories. That dollhouse one, very good. Good choice.
Wait, I think I could do this.
Oh,
Yeah.
good job, Ashley.
Okay. Yes. Figuring this out. I do have to say a memory, and then we'll start talking about the Star Trek episode, or we'll start talking about the Trek actors.
Mhm.
So I lived with my in-laws in Los Angeles during the second half of the pandemic,
Yeah.
during like most of like end of 2020, beginning of 2021, and uh, my now father-in-law was really, he has this like obsession with pinball games, and there was someone in LA selling a Twilight Zone pinball game, and
What?
so he really wanted it because he collects them, and he was singing the Twilight Zone song, not the like theme, but the na 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 in the Twilight
Twilight
Zone, like
Zone.
all the time, nonstop. And he thought, well, if I'm going to buy this pinball machine, I should probably watch some Twilight Zone episodes so I become a fan. And so he asked me, because I'm the resident nerd in the house. Everyone else
Mhm.
is very normal. And for like, what's a good Twilight episode? He said, quote, I want to see the city on the edge of forever version of the Twilight Zone. And I was
What?
like, oh, that's high pressure. And what I'm thinking now is I should have called Rihanna and asked her which episode should I show him.
Mhm.
But I was like Googling, trying to figure out like what's the
Yeah.
scariest one, what's the best one, and I picked one. It might be the one that mom's talking about, Freaky Dollhouse, but
Mhm.
it was about this like kid, this doll who came to life, and it was kind of like a Chucky moment,
Yeah.
but it was not that scary. It was kind of a like
Mhm.
subpar episode, and still to this day I cannot sleep sometimes because I'm so embarrassed that I showed him a subpar episode and not the Sitting on the Edge of Forever Twilight Zone episode.
I mean, ooh, that's tough. I'm gonna oh, maybe you have to do it. Highlight drafts comment. People are like all over. Was the one with the astronauts?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Giraffe has got the knowledge. And yeah, I mean, there's so many that stand out to me still to this day, you know.
Okay, wait, what? Giraffe? I had all my wedding pictures done in a Twilight Zone themed mini golf. That's amazing.
Giraffe, I never think that I can love you more than I do,
This
and then I do.
that's
Like,
just
that's
amazing.
incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm gonna hopefully saying that story aloud to an audience will cast that
Yes.
memory
It's
out.
okay. Honestly, I mean, he's probably going and watching more episodes now, so he'll get a vast,
I think,
understanding.
yeah. Well, and the episode after that kind of failure, I did show him what was it, the Nightmare on 20,000 Feet,
Yeah,
which
classic.
is one we're going to talk about today. So,
Mhm.
Rihanna, let's get into it. I'll say the watch list
Yes, our very short watch list.
that we sent. Let's do the order. So we are going to be talking about The Valley of Shadows, which features James Doohan, and then The Nick of Time. Or no, sorry. Then Quality of Mercy, which features Leonard Nimoy. Then The Nick of Time, featuring Shatner. Then Nightmare at 20,000 Feet Up, also Shatner. We're having a little Shatner sandwich. And then we're going to end with The Encounter, which has George Takei.
Wow, I'm so excited. I think I remembered like learning about Trek actors being in the Twilight Zone from our dad, like cuz he's a huge movie buff. He knows a lot about like background stuff and everything. And so it's really cool because he was like, "Oh yeah, a bunch of Trek actors got their start in the Twilight Zone." And so I'm really like sorry, I'm laughing at Giraffe's comment. Did you really just say a Shatner
Yeah,
sandwich?
it's not really Shatner sandwich, it's like 2 Shatner pieces of bread, and
Oh,
that's
that's
it.
it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's really exciting that there are like familiar faces within a show that
Mhm.
I already love, and to see them in these different roles is super fun.
And
So
they're
yeah.
babies, they are little
Oh,
children.
I know they're so young. It's insane to see. Like it's yeah, just so cool. So
Alright,
let's start
so
with Doohan.
let's go with Valley of Shadows. This is the only one that we watched that's actually 51 minutes long, so, length of a Trek episode.
Yeah.
Um, Doohan is not in this one too much, but Rihanna, can you
Yeah.
give us a little plot synopsis about this episode?
Yeah, so this might sound like a plot synopsis of a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, so hang in with us. There is a man with his dog driving, took a shortcut with the worst map I've ever seen in my life, and he ended up in a town called Peaceful Valley. And this town is essentially not as it seems, as Rod Serling will say. It is unlike a town of any other. And it turns out that he is unable to leave this town because of the secrets that they hold within it. And so we are unfolding the information with this character. His name is Mr. Redfield
I think it's
and
Roberts?
Roberts Redfield.
Robert Redfield?
Um,
Robert Redford? Is it
um,
Rod Sterling's in this one, I think? Yeah.
Rod
No, Rod
Stewart.
Stewart, yeah.
Ashlyn's trying her best.
Sometimes you win.
And so essentially we are figuring out what is going on with this town alongside Mr. Redfield and getting to meet the mysterious characters along with it. Turns out this town has pretty much like alien tech that they have been using for the past decade or so, maybe longer actually. I think it's been quite a long time.
Yeah.
And it's really spooky vibes for sure. So I want to just talk about the beginning of this because this is where we get to see Doohan is in the first about 10-15 minutes of this episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the map that you mentioned is so terribly drawn, and I just I lived in the days where there wasn't cell phone GPSs. I
Yeah.
had like a GPS I would stick to my dashboard. Before that, I remember my mom printing out MapQuest directions, giving them to me, or taking me to soccer with that. But oh man, before that, like, what do you do? You have to have like a giant map that you fold out of the car. I remember my dad driving around with that too. And so this poor guy is driving around, and this map is so badly hand drawn. It's just like turn. It's terrible.
It has 3 points on it with a line in between each, and they're not, you can't even read the handwriting. Like his friend, whoever gave him the directions to the town he was going to, not a very good friend. Like he really got him lost in this situation.
This whole episode is his fault.
The friend, the friend we do not see. I also want to shout out to the amazing dog. The dog's name, which I wrote down. Yeah, Rolly. So cute. Big floof. I love when there's animals in these episodes, but it also makes me extremely nervous because, like you said, this is episodic. This is a one-off. Anything could happen to the dog or the man.
Well, the dog is kind of what gets us into all of this because this guy, he's talking to his dog. He says, "Oh man, Rolly, we're almost out of gas." So this is why he pulls into this little valley, Smiling Valley. What's it called?
Peaceful Valley.
Peaceful Valley. And the guy who's filling up his gas is very sus and strange and is kind of telling him like, you need to get out. And you need to go to like Burden or something, whatever the next town is. And then the dog sees this cute little ginger cat that this girl is playing with, and the dog chases it. And then the girl uses this little device to like get rid of the dog.
Literally makes the dog vanish.
Literally vanish, yeah. And Roberts is definitely freaking out. He's like, "Where's my dog? What did you do?"
Yeah.
And then at this point, he's kind of sucked into the weirdness of the town. We see Doohan appear because he knocks on the door and he's like, "Yo, Roberts is like, my dog is gone and your daughter did something to it. Like, I don't know what's going on." And for me, like seeing Doohan in this role was crazy because I've never heard, besides like interviews when he's much, much older, I've never heard him speak in an American accent.
Same. I was thrown off, to say the least.
I was so thrown off. Yeah. And his inflections were the same, which was crazy. And also his voice was much deeper and honestly quite sexy. I was like, "Oh, hey, sir."
Yeah. He's very attractive as a younger man. I was like, ooh, Doohan.
All of these men in the Twilight Zone just, Trek man, I should say. Let's leave it at that.
Yeah, not the gas station man.
No.
This was a fun role. I am very sad that we didn't get to see more of him, but he got to be the dad of Sissy was the daughter's name, who made the dog vanish, and he gets out his own little, what he calls a stereo later, a little oh, don't worry, it's just a little stereo device, and he like pulls up this cord thing and makes the dog reappear. it's we learned later, pretty much a handheld transporter. It like transports matter and then places it somewhere else. I'm like, yeah, that's just a transporter. So this is also a theme we're going to be seeing, is that like the technology. I know that we talk a lot about how, oh yeah, Roddenberry like created the technology we have today. Like he did flip phones, he did iPads, all that stuff. But I'm like, but the Twilight Zone created Star Trek technology.
Oh my gosh, you know what I just realized? Because I actually have a couple of facts I forgot to
Yeah,
mention before we
please.
started talking about the episode. So I'm just gonna insert them right here since you said Roddenberry's name. It's a great
Hmm.
transition.
Yeah.
So Rod Sterling, I don't think we said it yet, but he created and like stars
Yeah.
on the Twilight Zone. So it's really his brainchild. And when Star Trek started, he had a review of it where he said Star Trek is a very inconsistent show, which at times sparked with true ingenuity and pure science fiction approaches. At other times, it was more carnival-like and very much more a creature of television than the creature of a legitimate literary form, which I thought
Mm.
was really interesting. And I think like kind of
Very
hit
self-aware. Yeah.
the nail on the head. Yeah. If you look at the Memory Alpha article about Twilight Zone, which is amazing that that exists on Memory
So
Alpha,
good.
they
Yeah.
have a whole list of episodes that are similar between the Twilight Zone and the original series and goes into the influences. I really encourage you to read it. It's really interesting. Um,
Yeah, we'll
but
post it on our bio and stuff because it's fascinating.
Oh, for sure. But then, so when Star Trek was canceled in the third season, Sterling actually gave a review again, and he said, "The day Star Trek was canceled, I could have cut off the heads of the network. It was a marvelous show." So interesting to
Mm.
see how his opinion changed over the three seasons. I mean, yeah, I like to think that Star Trek is like a third, like the best television you've ever seen in your life, a third like pretty decent, like okay, and then and then the last third is like garbage. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
a
Like
slog. Yeah.
I like we love the garbage here, but like it's
It's still
there's some
garbage.
episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just thought that was interesting that that he had even commented on Star Trek. So
Yeah,
anyway,
very
yeah.
cool. I love that. Yeah, it's really cool. And something else that Rod Serling said in the beginning of this episode was that this is the capital of the Twilight Zone, which I love that he distinguished that because a lot of times he's like, this is the corner of the Twilight Zone, or he's about to enter a section or like an area, but this is the capital. Like this is an entire city that is like aware of the Twilight Zone, they are living in it and utilizing it. So it's like
Hmm.
everything combined. I think that that is such a cool concept and something that like we don't get to see a ton in the other episodes.
Rihanna, thank you for saying that. I have never noticed that. I realized at the beginning of, or like kind of first 5 minutes when he's introducing the plot, that
Hmm.
he does say different things every time, but I
Yeah.
never thought about that. Well, and so the reason we find out why this is the capital of the Twilight Zone is because this genius guy invented this transporter technology, and he basically said you can't give it to the rest of humanity until there's peace.
So we're talking Star Trek time. Like you've got you've got centuries.
I would argue, even so,
Yeah.
like there's not
Still
peace
not
even
peace.
in
Yeah.
yeah. I want to share Giraffe's comment who said she says, "Do you know about how the murder of Emmett Till is what pushed Rod Serling to write The Twilight Zone?" And I did not know that.
Wow.
Um,
Oh,
I do
that
think
is
that like a similarity between Twilight Zone and Trek is that they both kind of use episodes to sneak under the radar of what was allowed on television.
mhm.
And so you can show things in this kind of like science, like sci-fi way
Yeah.
that are can be really progressive and
Yeah.
get to the audiences who are looking for it. So I'm not.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not surprised to hear that. That's amazing.
Even watching the Twilight Zone in general, I realized that it's way less sexist and racist than anything during that time. Even Star Trek, like which came a bit later. Uh, I think that there was just a lot of push to be like super focused on the like rights of people and understanding like where the discrepancies are, where like the where minorities are being like push back. And so it's really cool to me because like I expect when I see something in black and white for it to be like pretty dicey, for today or not hold up. And sure, there's parts of it, or the women are sometimes portrayed as just women of that era portrayed on media, like they're glowing and they have like a accent and they're like just there to be the love interest, but a lot of times they're the main character or they're the ones going through the Twilight Zone or what have you. So I just also want to bring that up, that it's like at times more woke and more ready to talk about political issues than even TOS was.
Yeah. Oh, and just thanks, Giraffe, for saying all
literally
this.
co-hosting the show with us.
Yeah, seriously. She says, soon after the trial concluded, Sterling, writing off the success of his most well-received teleplay to date, felt compelled to write a teleplay around the racism that led to Till's murder. Yeah, that's just,
like to take that and use it as media and then create this entirely like incredible franchise that then led to a movie and 2 spin-offs. Like, wow.
Yeah.
So cool.
Well, so to finish this episode, the whole idea, is to not let humanity use this technology yet. And as soon as Roberts finds out about it, he basically wants to take it and like give it to the rest of the world, in his words, to like save all the hungry people and to help everyone in the world who's suffering. And you're so selfish and hypocritical for keeping this all to yourself. And yet when he is finally able to escape the town, he's been trying the whole episode to leave.
Yeah.
And he is fallen in, well, this like lady has fallen in love with him.
So we think, yeah.
She's like ready to leave the town with him, but before he breaks into their town hall, steals the plans, which we find out later is a blank notebook, and he makes a gun out of this, like, I'm just calling it transporter technology.
Well, it's a replicator, this technology. Like,
yes.
It literally takes the code, you put it in a machine, and it creates a sandwich or whatever you want.
That's
again
insane.
Another technology that then Trek like sort of cherry picked and used.
I mean, all science fiction kind of like shares the
the
love.
For sure.
So the first thing he does literally is make a weapon, and he uses all of this for bad, for the good of humanity. And this is how everyone justifies their bad deeds, is like, oh, I'm doing this for someone else's good. And I just can't. I'm going to finish off. Giraffe is quoting this wonderful article here. The censorship that followed by advertisers and network fee for a blowback from white Southern audiences forced Sterling to rethink his approach. His response ultimately was the Twilight Zone.
Which, like we were saying, is still able to ride that line, like past the censors and the people who, like the white South and everything, in order to get, like, they have those underlying meanings. It's kind of even Shakespeare-esque, Shakespeare was able to write a top layer that is like, this will get past the censors. Everyone gets married in the end. It's fine. But underneath, there's so much more to unpack. And like, that's actually super political and like very queer coded. So anyway, I just love that about like when writers can do that and sort of stick it to the man and like, I got this in, even though you thought it was like not me being actually pretty political and actually doing a lot of big statements. Like, that is so cool.
Well, that's what makes it timeless. And that's why we can watch the Twilight Zone today and still get something out of it. Like really good media and good literature can do that,
Yeah. And, I got a connection here, Ashlyn. We're talking, currently I'm editing actually the section where we discuss Wolf in the Fold of our spooky series. And
it's going to be out tomorrow.
Yes,
get ready to
so
listen.
Excited.
Yeah, everyone watching now gets a special sneak peek.
Yes. Since we're talking about Doohan, it's kind of perfect because this episode actually kind of reminded me of Wolf in the Fold very, very loosely, because at the end, you're like, how? In the end, it's the mayor of the town was saying like, you are our first prisoner. We have no idea what to do with you because we've never had any sort of backlash from this town before, similar to Argalius, where the whole planet is like, we don't have prisoners, so our punishment is slow torture to death because like we don't know what else to do with you. And so I thought that the ending was actually really cool. And I was laughing with the mayor because he was like, I don't know why I didn't think of this before. And he just wiped his memory and sent him back in time, essentially, back to his car when he was first getting the gas filled. And the dog did not go and chase the cat, and they were able to get out of town. Oh, sorry.
Speaking
that's
of cat.
my cat's food. But yeah, so I think that was sort of reminding me. And also similar to McCoy's quote in another episode where he says, a cage is a cage, you know, in Dagger of the Mind. And I was thinking the exact same thing in this, like, even though, because the mayor is telling him, you can stay here or we can kill you, you know, so you can stay here as a pseudo prisoner, but we'll put you up in a house. You can have all the food you want. You will never hunger or want for anything. But it's very similar to the cage where like he's still going to fight against this and say, no, I'm getting out of here no matter what, even if it means my death. But luckily he didn't die. He just got mind wiped. And I'm so glad the dog didn't die. I was like so stressed when it said it, like they said he was dead and then they brought him back to life. I was like, thank you. Even though you all are kind of sus with your technology, like at least you saved the dog.
Yes, thank you for saying that. I was also thinking about the cage specifically when the Telosian says to Pike after he's like Googled humanity. He's like, oh man,
Yeah.
your species has a unique hatred for captivity. We're so sorry for putting you through this, Pike.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and even like him hitting against the like invisible sort of force field outside of his house.
Yeah,
I was
outside of
thinking
his
the cage
house.
as well. I was expecting that like wah, 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 wah noise it makes. But yeah, I think this is a great thinker. It's a really good episode. Doohan does a great job even in his little small role he gets.
It's worth it to listen to that buttery voice, let me
That
tell you.
sultry tones.
Oh, he's like, hey, you better go uptown. I'm like, oh Lord.
He's like, I'll look for the dog. Yeah.
Okay, I think let's go on to Quality of Mercy.
Yes. This is insane. This is an episode of, this is the same title as the finale of Strange New Worlds season 1. And it is also a Shakespeare quote from The Merchant of Venice. I will read the whole quote. It is, the quality of mercy is not strained upon the place beneath. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. So classic Shakespeare, just like saying a lot of blesseds and vows. But
so wait, what does that mean? Can you in English for me?
You know, I haven't really studied this quote. Can't tell you.
That's fair.
I think I need a Merchant of Venice scholar here to give us a little info, but I'm really thrilled that this has a similar title. When I saw it was on there, I was like so freaking excited.
Well, there was someone who commented on our post, and I'm trying to find it right now, who was like this is all
This is
about
a crazy connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, I think I found it on Twitter. Yes, Kelly. Okay, it's at Antipodal. Your last name is very hard to say. Sventen Yorgi. Just a reminder that hashtag Nimoy's Twilight Zone episode of Quality of Mercy is tied to Quality of Mercy, but also Balance of Terror in original series. Nimoy's character is named Hansen, as is Outpost 4 Commander in both Star Trek episodes. So
epic, insane connection.
Even deeper than the title connection. I love it.
Like Trek writers and Twilight Zone writers, they're insane. They're so smart. It's so cool. Yeah. So this was also just a freaking joy to see Nimoy in another role, because I have not really seen him in anything else. I know that there are some people who will like go back and watch a ton. Like I know people who go back and watch all of DeForest Kelley's like Westerns and stuff, but I haven't really done any of that. I haven't gone back and seen other people's work outside of Trek really. And so it was really fun to see Nimoy in a different role, but to still hear that like beautiful, beautiful voice. I was like, that's still Nimoy. And just cool to see him in this interesting setting. I think that A Quality of Mercy, it takes place in Okinawa, I believe, August 6, 1945. So right during the Japanese theater, the Pacific part of World War II. And we are in a like jungle, like Japanese setting. So it's really interesting because we're not in a small town in America this time.
No, absolutely not. I love what Rod Sterling says. He's like, this is the last few pages of the big book of war. I'm like, yeah, man.
The writing, even from a writing standpoint, like everything they say is so poetically done, especially Rod Sterling is like just gorgeous the way he speaks and writes, even those intros. I'm like, this is just amazing. Yeah.
Well, and this is what I'm talking about, where it's like middle of the jungle, and then he comes in his suit, and he's like, and this time he said, "This is the high noon of the Twilight Zone." So this is not like
Yeah.
a location, but like a time. So I'm wondering, in
Mhm.
some episodes, is he like, "This is the 5 a.m. of the Twilight Zone"?
This is the twilight hour of the Twilight Zone.
Oh,
Like,
that's like the
that's too
peak,
meta.
the peak episode.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Nimoy's role is a little limited in this, but I mean, I like to think of this as the Nimoy's on the phone episode,
Yeah,
because he's
totally.
mostly the guy who's relaying orders from the front, or like a commander. I just
Mhm.
feel like he
Yeah,
always is carrying around this phone,
the
and he
little
looks
phone, yeah.
really tired.
They're all so tired. They've been kind of holed up in this area for 32 days. It is a infantry that has been trying to shell this cave that a bunch of Japanese soldiers are in for 32 days. So quite a long time they've been there. This infantry is exhausted. They've lost a lot of men. They've killed a lot of men, and they're getting this kind of green lieutenant who is just coming in. He is pretty new to the war, like, or at least to this section of the war, has not killed before, uh, but is just ordering people out the wazoo. He is really just kind of an a-hole, to be honest. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
and again, like the brilliance of the simplicity, because
Mhm.
like the first time we see this officer who's just joined them, he is using his binoculars, and he accidentally bumps them on his helmet, and the two
Mhm.
guys next to him are kind of like, LOL, like
Yeah.
he's so green, he like can't even use his binoculars properly. So right away, this guy, it does not fit in. And I think he's trying to get some glory before the war is over.
I think
Um,
so too. Yeah, because like he probably wants to go back to the States and tell a bunch of war stories about how he was a hero and all of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But I mean, the people in this platoon are just exhausted. They have not slept much. They're really tired, and they are sick of killing people. They've been in
Yeah.
this war for years. Um, there's quotes that I can't remember the name of the guy who's like mostly talking to the officer.
Mhm.
He's really cool. But
Yeah.
he basically informs them, like, you are the third officer that we've had,
Yeah.
and generally in combat, that's who the Japanese will go for, is they try to find the
Mhm.
commander, and they look for him doing like hand signals to
Mhm.
motion what to do, and then they take him out. And so,
Yeah.
like, I think their perspective as like the troop is, this guy's not going to last that long, and especially if he's as violent and bloodthirsty as he appears to be.
Yeah, absolutely. This, I think, whole episode really encapsulates the sort of war is hell, like vibe, because they are talking about storming the cave and it might get them all killed. And the sergeant, who you said was really cool, he's talking to the lieutenant, and he says, how many men have to die before you're satisfied? And he says, if all of them have to die, then that's what needs to be done, and he's saying all this rhetoric of kind of like, the Japanese are our enemy, we will do anything to fight them, die for your cause, kill everyone you need to, like all of this just like toxic war rhetoric that is just like ingrained in soldiers, that we find from both sides, because the Twilight Zone element of this is that our main character, who sadly is not Nimoy, but he gets switched to the other side and he becomes a Japanese soldier, and he is experiencing the exact same verbiage and rhetoric from his commanding officer that he was just giving to his subordinates. And it is so genius, because it's really showing that like there are two sides of war, and that each side has pretty much like the same rhetoric and is going to be saying the same things. And this soldier who is being like transformed onto the Japanese side is like, what if we just like take them as prisoners, or what if we don't kill them, like, because he's thinking like, oh, I'm still an American, I don't know what's going on, wherein 2 minutes ago he was ordering to kill everybody regardless, even if there were wounded Japanese men in the cave and everything. Like, that is just brilliant. I think that it's a definitely a little heavy-handed of an episode, but it has to be when you're talking about war, and especially the horrific things that happened in the Pacific theater and all of that.
Oh, yeah. Well, and actually, kind of thanks Twilight Zone for teaching this guy a lesson that didn't
Mhm.
end in violence. Because I thought that he would be forced to go attack the Americans in the cave and die, was how I
Mhm.
thought it was going to end. But he's spared, and at the end, he hears the commander on the Japanese side give the exact same speech, like literally
Mhm.
exact same speech. And
Yeah,
I love that
verbatim. Yeah.
the camera just focuses on his mouth, and so it's
Yeah.
just like the perspective of our officer, and he's just like, ah, like do 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 do, literally Twilight Zone music
Literally.
is playing in
Yeah.
his own head.
Yeah.
And he's like, geez, like I was wrong. This is bad. And so then at the end, he switches back to the American side. And I think he's going to call off the assault and not go into the cave. He's got everybody covered in mud, ready to go
Mhm.
chase him out. And then Nimoy gets a call.
He's always getting calls.
And he says, "Oh, the Air Force just dropped a bomb. I think the war is going to be called in a couple days." And that's woo, that's
That's
it.
the A bomb. Like it's really like it gave me like a pit of my stomach feeling because then the American men are like yelling and celebrating, and we see our main character is not because like uh the sergeant from earlier saying like, "Ah, lieutenant, like sorry you didn't get all those kills you wanted, like next war you'll have plenty of them." And the main character says, "I hope not." He's like really learned a lesson about the evils of war and how it turns everybody into this sort of killing machine.
Oh yeah. Um, a couple things I noted about this episode. First of all, I do think it is problematic that
Yes.
they had this actor who plays the
The
officer.
lieutenant, yeah.
He has a Japanese accent, and they give
Mhm.
him like some eyeliner to make him look more Japanese. And I don't.
Very problematic, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to watch. I wish that they had just kept him American or
Mhm.
even like recast him. Like that would have
Mhm.
been really cool too to
Mhm.
cast like a completely different person for
Yeah,
that.
someone with, like, similar height and
Someone
build.
who's like actually
Mhm.
Japanese, yeah. So
Mhm.
that was hard, and that was really taking me out of this episode.
Same, yeah.
Um, the other thing that is just it's more of a like reflection on our time compared to the time that the Twilight Zone was being made is I just forget how prominent like World War II was because this is only 20 years out
Mhm.
of World War II being done
Yeah.
or less. And yeah, less. And for me, like I feel like in our culture, whenever there's references to war, it's the Vietnam War,
Mhm.
especially like if they're American soldiers fighting in
Yeah.
it. The Korean War, maybe a lot of, I mean, Afghanistan, but it's not really.
Mhm.
I don't know, like as references heavily. And
Mhm.
for me, I just it's crazy to see like obviously how much the world was continually affected from World War II and how um like just painful those memories are and like just maintained in society.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the Twilight Zone is informed by the war. Even in the previous episode, we were discussing Valley of the Shadow. There's a quote where the mayor is saying, "Oh, we do it out of necessity, not of choice," and then the main character says, "Thank you, Adolf Hitler." And so like they're still making a lot of very apt comparisons to similar situations, or just like every thought is still going to the war, which makes sense. I mean, it was like the
Oh
most
yeah.
devastating thing to happen, and so which is like even putting that lightly. So I'm really glad you brought that up, Ashlyn.
Well, and once again, thanks, Giraffe. Most of the cast are veterans too. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
makes sense then that like you would have a ton of people coming out of the war, and then kind of like because everyone was drafted at that point during the war, and it was
I mean,
all hands on deck.
our great grandfather fought in the war.
Hmm.
Yeah, Grandpa Holt.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note,
Yeah.
let's do something completely different. Let's talk about Shatner.
Yes, and before you do that, I also we didn't get a chance to read Marilyn Roth's little comment from earlier. She
Oh
said
yeah.
that the Twilight Zone episode she remembered was that little girl that fell out of her bed through the wall. Yes, also very scary. If any of
Um,
you remember that.
yeah.
Ooh.
I don't remember, but that seems really scary.
Just like, ooh, they can think of everything and any ways to like freak you out.
Okay, well, let's go to the nick of time. Um, this one is again, young baby Shatner. I think he's probably
Baby.
13 years old.
He's probably like around my age, like
I think
24
early
or
20s.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
early 20s.
Hmm.
So he is a newlywed with his wife, and they are on their honeymoon. They're on their way to New York, but they are in Ohio. They stop in this little town because their car broke down and they need a repair. So we see them getting towed to the garage, and they set up the like type of relationship that they have really quickly. Obviously, it's clear that they're newlyweds because they're
Hmm.
like holding hands. And
Yeah.
I just loved when they leave the car and they're like, oh, let's go get some lunch. They're walking to the cafe, they're holding hands, and there's a pole on the street, and they say bread and butter, and
Yeah.
Shatner pulls his wife like around the pole, and he says, I'm just trying to save your life. And she's like, that's so silly. And I
Yeah.
just, that like unlocked a memory for me because I forgot I used to do bread and butter all the time. It's like this
Yeah. Our
weird
mom
thing.
like taught us that. Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't even know why we say that, but
What
it's
is the
like,
origin of bread and butter?
is it yeah, it's not the Twilight Zone, but it's like this thing. If you're holding hands and you have to like break apart because of a pole or something, it's bad luck, and I guess you'll die.
Yeah.
Um, but
Like
so
stepping on a crack. Like just don't want to do it.
yeah, so I think this is supposed to set up immediately that Shatner is a really superstitious dude.
Yes.
Like his character is. I'm just gonna call him Shatner. I forgot his name. Um,
Don S. Carter is his name in
Oh,
this one.
thank you, Rihanna. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Dawn's superstitious, but just was shaken by the bread and butter reference. I haven't
Yeah.
like said that phrase in 20 years, probably. So
Totally. That was fun to see. Yeah, I really like the way they set this up. I think one of the other things that the Twilight Zone excels in is setting up relationships really quickly. Like you said, they don't have a lot of time, to set up an entire person's life and story and how they are, how they interact with the world and with people that they know. And so it's fun when we get a couple because often it's someone by themselves driving cross country or coming into a small town or being in a machine. There's a million, or it's like three astronauts. I've seen that trope like five times. So it's cool to see a couple, especially because we get to see the dynamic of both of them. We get Shatner, we get Don and his paranoia or like near paranoia as the episode goes on, and then we get Pat, who is the wife, and she has like a completely different idea of superstition. She's not superstitious at all. I think it's a part of Dawn that she's sort of like, I accept it because I love you. Like, it's not my favorite part about you.
yeah. And then I want to interject. Thank you, Michelle. This is our mom also, so we have to
Yeah.
feature her.
Hmm.
She's the expert. So bread and butter, apple core. Who's your friend? That's the saying. And then by saying the phrase, the bad luck of letting something come between them is thought to be averted.
Oh.
I love that because you're like, hey, come around. Let's not break up because of this pole.
Yeah.
Thank you,
That's
mom. Thank
that's
you.
cool.
I
Yeah.
now again, I'm like unlocking memories of the apple
Yeah.
core. Oh
Apple core.
Lord.
Yeah, well, and then that shows that he didn't even want to test that. He didn't like he was going to say it, but he's like, "No, I'd rather just pull you around this pole and not have us be broken up," because he's like, "Don't even want to tempt fate."
Yeah, exactly. Um, so okay, so they go to this restaurant and kind of weird, like strange people. This guy's really wanting them to try the chicken fried steak.
He's so
Um,
pushy about it. I'm like, "Just let them eat what they want, my dude."
Yeah, exactly. But they happen to sit at this table, and Rod Sterling tells us a couple minutes after they sit down that they get the lucky chance of sitting at this this penny. It's like you pay a penny and you get like a fortune. And this one is real, so you're actually knowing the future in his like kind of vague replies.
Yeah.
But as the episode goes on, Don slash Shatner is becoming obsessed with it because he realizes it predicts correctly that he got this promotion that he's been hoping for. So he said he's the world's youngest office manager, which I had to laugh at because good for him, being an office manager.
Yeah. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is a little shoddy. Can you see me?
I can. You
Yeah.
kinda you sometimes freeze, but I know you always come
Oh,
back.
yeah. Yeah, I was like, "Oh, he's the youngest ops manager, and Kirk's, like, one of the youngest captains," he's just always playing very, like, characters who are very, like, promotable, I guess.
Yeah, but this little Satan guy, because there's a
The
bouncy
Mystic
headed.
Seer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, the mystic
Bouncy-headed
seer.
Satan, though, is probably better.
Well, that's what's on top of the penny thing. I feel like this is the only proper use of pennies, just as a side note, because pennies are completely useless. And so if I had the seer thing, I would just like dump all my pennies into it.
Yeah, I mean,
I
even back in the day when pennies were worth more, it's still like, "Yeah, just put them in there. Know your
I
future."
think probably because of inflation, pennies are kind of like dimes today. Um, where like but I mean, also their meal, it was like $5 for the whole meal. It was amazing,
Oh,
and they got a
yeah.
lot of food. They got ice cream and 2 sandwiches and
Right, but also they're not getting as much money, so it's
excuse
that
me, yeah.
trade-off.
Yeah,
Um,
very true.
I do love seeing that about just period or, like, period pieces, LOL. It's in that period, but I love sort of comparing that, of like, "Oh, how did people live back then?" So interesting.
Oh, yeah. I'm seeing Giraffe said, when you said that little Satan guy, it made me think of Lucian in TAS. And yeah, we actually talk about him in the episode that's coming out tomorrow because it's the magics of Magus 2. So that's just a fantastic episode. Um,
Yes, I love that app so much.
um,
That's really good.
if you drink with Satan, it's always a good idea.
Yeah.
Um, so
Even if
yeah,
it's
so
bouncy head Satan.
yeah, this Satan is interesting, and I kind of thought this episode was gonna go in a different way because as Dawn is, understanding that he is responding in not just random answers, like, kind of specifically vague answers to all of his questions. For example, he's like, he narrows down these questions like, if we leave before 2:30, will something happen to us? And he says, try again. He's like, if we leave before 3, will something happen to us? And he says, well, like
It says,
you
"Dare
can.
you risk finding out?"
Yeah, exactly. And so then they leave a little bit before 3, and then 3 on the dot, they almost get hit by a car. And so
Yeah.
for Shatner, who's so, like, superstitious, he's freaking out, and he's like, "This is a sign that this thing is actually telling the future." And this wife is getting more and more frustrated and I think just scared, not of the little Satan dude, but of who she sees her husband becoming because of this and what his obsession is driving him to.
Yes. This is something that is so.
Oh no.
Oh, no. Hello,
I hear
hello.
you. I hear
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Yeah, about the Twilight Zone in general is they also tend to focus on characters' reactions to whatever the like mystical thing that's going on or the Twilight Zone factor of the episode. And that can also demonstrate like their personality traits. And I think that both our Shatner episodes, he's very obsessive and very fixated on a certain thing that's going on. And so it's really interesting because we see him even like holding the rabbit's foot keychain and it has a 4-leaf clover on it, like 2 for 1 keychain there. And he's like kissing it before he makes the call about his promotion. And then, like you said, he starts to spiral out of control, get very superstitious, so much so that after the near car accident, they go back to the cafe because he wants to just like go and ask more questions to the mystic seer and see what else he can figure out about his future. And so this is where it gets really cool because again, I totally agree. I thought this episode was going to go a completely different way. I thought he was just going to be like there for the rest of his life, like putting pennies in, like not actually fulfilling any of the future that the seer is trying to show him. But because he keeps asking questions. And then I love when the tide turns and then Pat, the wife, she starts asking questions and she is, asking about like, well, I get married. And it's like you already know that answer
The
and all
answer
of
is
this stuff.
obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that she doesn't want to stay because she's, like you said, afraid of how he's becoming. And it's so so inspiring, the speech she makes to him about like, hey, Don, we can dictate our own lives. All the questions you were asking were like leading questions. You know, you were the one who predicted something bad would happen, and it just said it probably will, you know, like it was just confirming what you were fearing. And so instead of dictating your whole life on this machine, how about instead we create our own destinies, our own futures? And I love that Dawn is able to say, oh my gosh, I've been such a jerk. Because Pat is like in tears at this point. She's like just so frustrated. The car's done, which the Mystic Seer did predict it was going to be done early. And the mechanic comes in, such a nice guy. He's like, I looked for you, and the car's done, so you guys can head out. And he kind of wants to stay there, you know, and keep putting in pennies to the seer. And she's just so overwhelmed. She starts crying, and he says, I've been such a jerk. Let's leave and dictate our own destiny, which was like such a cool, not what I expected.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think what makes the situation come to a head is that he's asking questions like, where will we live? Like, will we live in the South, in the West, in the East?
Yeah.
And we don't hear, or we don't see or hear what those answers are. But the
Mhm.
way that he keeps persistently asking, like,
Like
oh,
feverish. Yeah.
yeah, like feverishly, that's when she's like, because she thinks that her future, like their future as a newly married couple, is going to be decided by this,
By
like,
little Satan. Yeah.
yeah, by a little Satan dude, and she doesn't want that, and I totally agree. Listen to the women. Woo!
Always.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, it works out because he listens to his wife, and I kind of thought it was gonna go like the Satan guy was gonna lead them into death, or like
Yeah.
he had a, like, evil agenda the whole time,
Hmm.
but no, that's kind of like, even what's even more interesting is that it's just the, like, the future as you wish to interpret it. And
Yeah.
I think I'm on the side of Pat. Like, I once you know that it could be real, I want to know even less, because what if
Yeah.
I don't like the answer, and what if I
Hmm.
can't change the answer?
Or what if
Or
it becomes self-fulfilling?
yeah, like, that's, it's just, it's too much to think about, and I don't like it. And I think the part that's creepy is how it ends, is that as soon as they leave, they're driving off to New York, another couple comes in who just looks haggard and terrible, and they sit and they're just putting in pennies nonstop, and they're like, "Will we leave here soon?" It's like,
Yeah,
"No."
and
And
he
they're
asks, "Is there any way out? Sorry, is there any way out, any way at all?" And we don't see the answers again, which I think is so good. Like, it would have kind of ruined the feel of it if we had seen like, "Nope, you're stuck here," you know, or whatever. Like, it was nice that we just don't see, but he and the wife just keep pulling. I thought that they were like themselves from a future, but no, I was like, for a second I was like, is that them in like 20 years and they came back and they're enslaved by the machine? But no, it's this completely other couple. And as Don, or as not Don, as Rod says it at the end, he says, enslaved by the tyranny of fear and superstition.
Yep. Same, Rihanna. I thought it was them from the future. The clue was that all of Shatner's answers from before were still on the table. So
Yeah.
unless it was going super Twilight Zone-y, it
Yeah.
I had a feeling it was a different couple.
Hmm.
But yeah, it really made me think about it. Like, if you get like so fixated on the future, that's where your reality will be, is just like
Hmm.
stuck thinking ahead, and you don't have a life that you're living in the present.
Yeah, and talk about an episode you can't predict. Like, once again, we thought it would go a completely different way, and the
Yeah.
writers just surprised the hell out of us, and it's so like fulfilling to me.
Oh yeah. Okay, we need to talk about Nightmare at 20,000 feet up.
Yes, this is probably, I'd say, one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, at least in my sphere. Not that I have a lot of Twilight Zone fans or friends, but also the episode, which I'm so bad with titles, so maybe Draft can help us out. But the one with the pig faces, of course, is like iconic. That's probably the most famous of all time. Our friend Sebastian showed me that one like years back, and it's just so excellent. But this Nightmare of 20,000 Feet is also like super popular, especially because Shatner gets to really put in some Shat acting in this
Oh
one.
my gosh. It's the most Shatner
Is this the
episode.
origin of like Shatner's overacting? Because it might be.
Honestly, it could be. Um, yeah, this one is why I've never heard it before, but I've seen memes go around. saying that people call the airplane seat that has a view of the wing the Shatner seat.
Yeah, and Ashlyn, I remember you saying, like, when you're on a flight, you were, like, thinking about that little gremlin on the wing.
I mean, I just think if you're flying, you should take a look and see if there's
Check
anything out there
check
on
your
the
plane
wing.
wing for gremlins. Yeah, you never
Yes,
know.
yes. So this one, I love the like background of like Shatner's character in this one because he is coming from a 6 month stay in a like mental health care facility because he had a like a breakdown on an airplane flight.
Mhm.
And now he's on his way home, but it's like very similar circumstances. It's an evening flight, and
In a storm, of course.
in a storm. And I mean, this is a triggering event, you know, like he's
Yeah.
reliving the moment that got him into the facility. I'm sorry, my nose is running so much.
No, you're fine. And, of course, they're flying into the Twilight Zone, so it's even gonna be more triggering.
I
Like,
missed.
poor guy.
Did you catch what Sterling said about like what time or
I
location of
think
the
I think
Twilight Zone?
it was like a sector or like an area of space or something.
Ooh.
Because they're I mean, or just like flying into the Twilight Zone, which is 20,000 feet above. The Twilight Zone can really exist anywhere, is what we're learning
The Twilight Zone is in all of us.
all along.
Yes.
It was really the Twilight Zones we found along the way.
Exactly. So the thing about this episode that I love so much is we come in thinking that this Shatner character is off his rocker and he should not be coming home from his stay in the facility because he keeps seeing this guy out there on the wing and everyone who he talks to, his wife who's being so sweet and supportive, is like, I don't see anything. And he keeps clicking the flight attendant button and he's like,
Come
quick.
look.
Yeah.
And it
then
jumps
there's
out of
nothing.
view every
Yeah.
time
Every
someone
time.
comes near. And it's not just a man, too. Like, he describes it as a gremlin, but I'm thinking of the little gremlin movie where they're like this tall. It's not really that. I think it's more, I mean, I can't really think of anything except it's a man in a furry suit with a like face mask that has
like
like
a
a
Yeti for me.
pig
Like
snout
a
kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, like a Yeti sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, and eventually even like the pilot, like officials come and are looking out the wing. And he's like and there's no one can see this guy except for Shatner.
Yes, and I love the way that they're able to film this and the way that like the episode moves because literally it's like so dark and stormy, which is such a great setting for any kind of horror or thriller media, anything really. But then you have this figure, and he starts out really far away, like he's really far back on the wing. And Shatner's, or his name's Bob Wilson in this one. Bob is
Oh,
kind of
thank
like,
you.
yeah, he's kind of squinting. He's like, what is that on the wing? Maybe it's just, trick of the light, whatever. But then it comes closer and closer, and it's kind of ambling its way over. First, just like, and it does this like weird little move. Like, whoever did that, whoever was in that suit, did such a great job of just body movements because this character, this little Yeti guy, doesn't get any lines. Like, he's not like chatting up Shat, he's just doing the crawl and doing the walk. And I just think all of that is so ominous and such a great way to set it up, especially for people who have fear of flying. And I would have a fear of flying if I was in that era of airplanes. Are you kidding me? Like, all of that looks very unsafe to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, you can still like you can smoke on planes for so long.
He's like pulling out a cig. Like, yeah, that was hilarious.
I want to
Yeah.
bring up Giraffe's comment. The jump scares, it works so well. I make my student watch it every year and they freak out every year. They call him the Air Yeti. So
That's a perfect description.
I think Yeti is a great
Yeah.
great name for this little dude.
The Air Yeti. Yeah, that jump scare. Thank you, Giraffe, for saying that. I agree, is one of the best parts of the episode because Bob ends up closing the curtains, which is exactly what I would do. I would just turn away and be like, out of sight, out of mind. Like, we're not dealing with that. But he's too curious. I think that there's always, there's probably that prickle in the back of his neck. He's probably like, I need to check this out. I need to know I'm not going crazy. Because he describes earlier that he had, quote, a teensy weensy breakdown, but now I'm cured.
That's
he
how
said
mental health works.
Yeah, now you're cured. Yeah, he said it was over tension and over anxiety due to underconfidence, which I gotta say, it is really special. I mean, I'm really, of course, sad for Shatner's character, but it's really cool that they had a man sort of struggling with anxiety and um, tension and underconfidence and stuff, because that is so often depicted only in women as being
Yes,
underconfident. And men like aren't capable of having breakdowns or of having mental illness and stuff. And that's kind of a dangerous rhetoric that I think a lot of media falls into. And so I was really like, happy that the woman, she was the wife, she was the one who was taking care of the kids for 6 months and was really like handling everything about the house, probably,
good for
had
her.
a job and all this stuff, wherein in the 60s, like that's this very like housewife role still, I mean, we're getting out of that tiny bit, but it's still like very prominent. And so she was able to take over into this like stereotypical man role while he was in like the female role, which of course none of that actually really matters or is relevant, but it's just important to think about because like that is not as seen as mental health issues in men. So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Great point.
yeah.
The thing that drives me so crazy now that I know how this episode ends, and let's just say it. So he- it basically escalates to the point where, I mean, I think the wife gives him a sleeping pill. I'm gonna
Mm-hmm.
sneeze. I hate that feeling where you're like about to sneeze.
Yeah.
Um,
Look at the light.
oh,
Bless you.
oh my goodness, thank you. Yes, I got my flu shot yesterday, and I just like,
Hey, I got mine the day before.
oh my
Wow,
gosh,
buddies.
twins! I think we got like COVID boosted like the same
Yeah.
day on accident too,
Yeah.
and
So
like
people who haven't, like, go do that.
get your flu
Health.
shot, and then you'll
Woo-hoo.
have symptoms like me.
Achoo.
Why do you not have any symptoms? What's whatever? It's fine. But so she gives him a sleeping pill. It doesn't work.
Well, he
he
freaking
he doesn't
like
really. He's like a dog.
yeah,
Like he's just like yeah.
hides it in the back of his like mouth or whatever.
Yeah, because he's like, I need to stay alert because of this guy on the wing. And eventually it escalates so much that he goes and he takes the gun of the air marshal
Yeah,
and
which guns
he
on planes. I'm like, oh, what a
well,
time.
that's like, I mean, apparently there's like an air marshal on every flight. So it's like spot the air marshal when you fly,
Yeah, wow,
There
I did not know that.
yeah. I don't know if
Wow,
it's still true, but that's what I
back then
know.
at least. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, and so which I don't think this is possible, he opens the emergency air,
This
emergency
is only
exit.
possible in the realm of the Twilight Zone, I
Yeah,
think.
there you go. He opens the emergency exit hatch, and he's like flying out of the plane, like his torso's completely out, and he's shooting the air yeti. Thank you, giraffe. I think
Yeah,
that's
patent pending.
patent pending, and he takes him out. Like,
He
yeah,
saves the day.
yeah, he saves the day. And this entire time, everyone thinks he's crazy. I think he's crazy. And so I'm still not sure though, because this show's
Hmm.
so crazy. Like, if he imagined all of this. And so at the end, we see him in a gurney being strapped down, taken away. And you see him looking pretty satisfied. He's like, it's fine.
I saved everyone's life.
I saved everyone. And then it pans out and you see that the wing of the airplane is actually has been tampered with. And
Yeah, because
so
this is his whole thing. Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
no, I just said like I was gonna say it's real. Like everything
Yeah.
happened actually happened and he literally
Ooh,
saved everyone.
chills during that part. Like, and this was his whole thing during it is he kept insisting like he's tampering with it. He kept lifting it up. Like I can see that he's trying to mess with the inner workings of the wires and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a air technician or something who comes and tries to placate him. Like, oh yeah, we know about that. Like we're just trying to keep it on the DL so people don't get freaked out. But obviously, he's just trying to not cause a panic because Bob is just extremely agitated, and like we said, keep clicking that button and everything. Click that button. And honestly, this episode gets to me so much because like a huge fear of mine is like losing my mind and is like hallucinating and seeing things that aren't there, like that, like like losing the integrity of my mind is like really like a terrifying fear of mine. And so to see sort of Shatner and or Bob, the character, see him question all of this, and to see us have to question him, like I'm watching the Twilight Zone, so I'm like 95% sure that this thing's real, but also it could be like we're talking about an illusion that he creates, or it could be anything with the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And so I think that you're right. It's so well done the way that they're able to showcase too, like I was talking about earlier, how the characters really they really show their true colors when in a Twilight Zone situation, because the wife, the flight attendant, like everybody else is essentially not listening to him and making him feel isolated, alone, and making him feel like he is making this up. And so he has to keep closing his eyes and say, like, it's not there, it's not there. And even at one point, he says, fine, I won't. Oh, sorry, my cat is going to the bathroom. She's just doing it all today. He's like, I literally won't say anything else because there's no point. He's like, I'll let you all die, which of course he doesn't. He takes the initiative and takes the gun and somehow doesn't suck everyone out of the plane, physics. I don't know how that happened, but it really shows the quick, like how quick people are to dismiss people who sound crazy. And it showed everyone's true colors. I think the wife was doing the best she could. Like, obviously she's having a really tough time too. But it's just so chilling. It's the way they do it is fantastic.
It's so good. Yeah, this is a classic episode, and it does stick in your head because of just like the visual of the Yeti.
And it's good to know that he's like going to be vindicated soon, because they're going to check out the wing and they're going to see, as Rod Sterling ends it, sort of, that there is a tangible manifestation of the Twilight Zone here, And so I know that he's probably going to get out of he probably won't get committed again, because they'll see, oh my God, like someone did tamper with the wing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we have one last episode to go. This is the encounter. I want to thank everybody who's been joining us this evening. Thank you for all your wonderful comments. I love talking with Rhianna, and I love talking about things, even if they're Trek and spooky adjacent.
Yes.
This has been a lot of fun. So let's talk about the encounter. This is one that's a little bit more heavy, but Rhianna and I thought it was the most impactful we didn't even say that, but the fact that we both agreed to put it last. To me, it was really interesting episode. So this, of course, features George Takei. And Rhianna, will you give a plot synopsis or a little intro about this episode?
I wish I had Rod's thing down, because it's just like two men in an attic, and I was like, will they kiss?
They will.
They
not
won't.
kiss.
Definitely will not. But it's sort of like two men in an attic, like both at odds ends with one another. And so essentially we have this very racist man who owns this house and the attic that he's in currently. And then we have George Takei's character, Arthur, who, I'm sorry, I don't know the racist man's name. I probably should. I don't know his name. He's just not cool. He's just extremely racist, and it shows. But essentially, Arthur comes in and he is looking just to mow this guy's lawn and to make some cash, $7 a week on Wednesdays. But the white man is like coming in being like, hey, come on up to my attic, let's like chat, have a beer. But he keeps calling him boy. It's like, just very racist undertones at first. Like he becomes very overt later. But this is essentially a dialogue about the war 20 years out of it.
Yes. I also want to note that this episode was actually banned from syndication. So when Twilight Zone first aired, this episode was included in that first run. But ever since then, whenever they showed the Twilight Zone on TV, they never have shown this episode until 2004 was when it was finally allowed to be shown. And that was because of the racial overtones. They said they didn't want to include. And it was the US that withheld it. You might not be surprised. I feel like this episode actually is a good way to handle or it is like a good example of how people with two very different backgrounds can interact with each other. Let's get into it, because it's a very complicated thing, but I'm just I'm curious why it was banned, because I just don't know. I feel like it's important to show this kind of episode.
I think that's part of the problem, is a lot of times shows like syndication is not going to show stuff that's important to show. They're going to show stuff that is bland, or that doesn't have a lot of political leanings, or not even political, but just like any sort of strong opinions about certain events. In the war, like we're talking about, this is, I mean, we're in about the same time in the episode as we are out from the war in
Yeah.
like when this episode aired, 20 years, 20 odd years since Pearl Harbor. Um, so the wounds are still there, the scars are still healing, and particularly the tumultuous relationship between Japanese Americans and the Americans, with the internment and everything that happened in America. It makes a lot of sense to me that American BS would not allow this episode, because God forbid they do anything a little bit, quote unquote, like, I'm trying to think of the right word. Like they don't want to offend anyone or kind of break any barriers. They just want to keep it very PG and very like,
Surface
yeah,
level.
let's just have it be space sci-fi stuff. Let's not talk about like racial politics. Let's not talk about like, let's not have a conversation between a Japanese American man and
The
a
vet.
veteran, of World War II. Like this veteran, he fought in the Pacific Theater, which, we were just talking about it earlier. They were able to do episodes like this, but I think this one has such a deep dialogue about the intrinsic issues of the war and of like race in general that like it really makes sense to me, sadly.
Yeah, well, and like Giraffe says, when you think Sterling wrote this to confront the audience to their own biases, it's kind of sad, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
The other thing which Giraffe just brought up, I was going to say is that, especially because, like, when you think of it, how crazy it is, George Takei, who was thrown into internment camps to film this, and then seeing it was censored, like that's got to be rough. I
He
was
is like the
thinking,
strongest man ever. Like he was out during his time in Star Trek. Like he was in an internment camp. Like he had to face these issues every single day, and like that is just so incredible. Like shout out.
I just think like this is a perfect casting because so let's talk about the beginning of it. Basically, Takei comes over and he's like, "Hey, Arthur, I want to make some money. Like, can I mow your lawn?" And the guy's like, "Sure." Like, and they make an agreement like right away. Like, I'll
Hmm.
come on Wednesdays every week.
Hmm.
Charge you this month's like $7 a month. Sounds good. And then the guy's like, "Hey, sit down. Come up. Let's have a beer." And I think it's like that's really friendly to me.
Hmm.
Like come up and have a beer with me. That's really generous. This guy's asking to hang out. Hey, let's talk for a little bit. We hear later in the episode that this guy is really lonely.
Yeah,
But
his wife went to go stay at his sister's. Like he has a drinking problem, so I think there's going to be a separation happening.
yeah, and then as Rihanna said, he is calling Arthur boy and just like demeaning him with a lot of microaggressions.
Hmm.
And right away, Arthur says, "Don't call me boy. I'm a grown man and I make my own money for a living."
Yeah.
He's completely standing up for himself. And then the guy, the vet immediately almost gaslights him and says,
Hmm.
"Hey, why are you getting so emotional about this? Like, why are you so sensitive about this?" And then, Arthur's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." He's like, "All I wanted to do is come up and have a beer with you. So why are
Yeah.
you getting on
Well,
my
and
case?"
he didn't even really want to. Like he was kind of forced up
No.
there because he kept saying, "No, no, it's okay. I was just confirming that I'm good to work here." And he kept insisting, like really, he does not know that no means no. And I think too, I love the line that Arthur says, is that like, "I get bugged by boy. I'm a fully grown man. I go by Arthur and sometimes Mr. Takamori."
Yeah.
So I love that he's like, "You can address me in these ways." And unfortunately, the guy does not listen to that, and he calls him boy again, and it's just, it continues to be demeaning. It really kind of reminds me of like some boomer energy when they're like, "Oh, you snowflakes are so fragile, like you can't take a joke anymore." Like this is very similar kind of gaslight that you're saying that he's doing, is putting it on the victim after he's like doing these microaggressions or full out like racial aggression, and then blaming him for getting upset about it. Wherein like if he called him like, "Hey, like you," I don't know. Like if Arthur was just as mean back, don't you think that he would get all up in arms? Like it's just so ridiculous, the kind of rhetoric that comes from that, but it's very very common to this day. This is like still happening.
Oh yeah. I just think it's a textbook form. Like you want to see microaggressions in action, like watch this episode. Also, just because like the dialogue is written so well that it's such a good back and forth.
Mhm.
Arthur shouldn't have to defend himself and explain like why this is like painful for him, everything that he's saying, but he does. And so also there's this whole thing going on with the sword that this vet has, and he
Mhm.
says in the beginning that he took it as a souvenir from his time in the war when a Japanese soldier dropped it and he took it. And then as Arthur is hanging out, drinking more of his beer, he realizes that soldier dropped his sword in like
Surrender.
surrender. Yeah.
Mhm.
And you must have shot him in cold blood, basically. And the vet doesn't even deny it. He's like, yeah, it was the war. Like we couldn't take prisoners.
Yeah, and he brings up this quote. He says, essentially, like, "Oh, I was just following orders. That's what I'm supposed to do. They told us not to take prisoners." And it reminds me of that Picard quote in Encounter at Farpoint, where he says, "Many wars have been justified by men just following orders." And it's the same kind of rhetoric, and it's exactly what we saw in the Nimoy episode, Quality of
Errand,
Mercy.
quality, mercy.
Errand of Mercy. Another Star Trek episode. There's too many episode titles out there. So I just think that is such an important thing to remember, is like following orders is an excuse for like shooting somebody in cold blood, like even if it is in wartime. And I think that, of course, the sword and the element of the moment is what creates this Twilight Zone dynamic, is because the sword first Arthur is just a little bit drawn to it, and the man goes down to get more beers, and Arthur says, like, I might kill him, like, to himself. He's like, I want to kill him. And then he's like, whoa, what came over me? And he like puts the sword aside, but it keeps drawing him to it, and we find out because the guy is very racist and is like, oh, you can read this, right? You know Japanese. And Arthur's like, no, I actually only know English. I was raised here, like I've never learned Japanese. But we find out that the veteran, did actually get the sword translated, because there's an inscription and it says, the sword will avenge me. And so I don't think it goes really deep into the history of the sword as much as I kind of wanted to. I wanted to learn a little bit more about like what Takei's connection was to this specific item, but I think it is sort of a like it's like this war is continuing between, like, in the minds of these two people from like this, like, same American Japanese, but in a completely different like mental war now, and in this like racial differences. And it's like hard to explain, but it's just really beautifully done, the way that, like you said, through the dialogue and through their conversations, we're starting to learn a lot more about their various roles within the war.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, it's such an interesting encounter that they both have, because the more their conversation progresses, you can tell that they are both very triggered by each other and like by this conversation, because the vet ends up revealing like everything that's going on. Well, okay, I should say that he has a couple of different peaks. Like there's a very tense moment in the first 10 minutes where the vet like gets a knife, and then Takei has the sword, and it seems like they're gonna fight. And
Yeah.
then the vet is like, "Oh, I was just joking around. Like, why,
Drink your
why,
beer.
why are you so serious?" Yeah, he keeps
Yeah.
saying like, "Let me get you another beer. Let me get you another beer." And like strangely, it's like he keeps this atmosphere of friendship, and I. I just we don't see these type of encounters with people these days,
Hmm.
and I think that was really interesting to see too. Because even though this guy is being so racist and Arthur's just putting up with it, you can tell that the more they're getting to know each other, the vet is like, I think he's trying to actually connect with Arthur on a humane level,
Hmm.
but
Or
he does
understand,
it.
at least. Yeah.
Yeah, like but he is failing. And this is when he says, like in the middle of the episode, I'm pretty lonely because my wife left. She might not be coming back. Also, I lost my job because I was drinking. I had a couple of beers like before work. And then he
He drives a cat
backlashes.
too. Like, that's
He drives a
not a
cat.
place to drink on the job, or
No,
any place really, but yeah.
operating machinery, like, no, no. And so he says that's why he lost his job. And then he backsteps, and he's like, actually, no, I lost it because they're importing all these workers and they can get so much cheap labor these days. People from Mexico, Puerto Rico, even the islands, I think he
Mhm.
says, people are coming over and doing this work for so much cheaper. And I'm like, oh my God, what year is it? I still hear this today. Like everyone always blames the immigrants.
This is
Like,
very predicting, like Rod and Roddenberry are both predicting these, like, I mean, because it's for human behavior and we haven't gotten out of any of that rhetoric that's so harmful and just incorrect about people. And it's really, again, like placing the blame where it should never be, like you were drinking on the job. That's why you lost your job, not
that's
because
period.
someone else was going to get it. Like, no.
Yeah, but so it's this back and forth that he can't be totally honest and upfront about his, like, mental health or, like, current state of mind, because he has to say, "Oh, no, no, it's an excuse. It's someone else's fault. It's not my fault. I'm not gonna take responsibility for my errors."
Exactly.
Yeah, and then Giraffe just brings up a great point. He's failing because he's trying to connect on a human level, but he decides that the other is less human than him. And this
Yeah.
brings me to a great point. Like in the episode, the vet ends up saying, when I was in the war, we were forced to think of them as inhumans, and the Japanese people were described to us as animals, as beasts, and that's how like we heard propaganda, and that's how we were able to kill them is because they were others. They were not human.
Well, and then he goes on to say, and now we're supposed to think of Japanese people as human and as of like people in working society.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, Arthur, you keep saying, and he keeps calling him like this, like other name that is like just another type of like racist stereotypical, like not even his real name.
No, no, no,
Um,
that's Arthur's real name. I think it's Tao is his real
I
name.
think he was like pronouncing it wrong because the way Arthur said it was different. So he's like purposefully not
Oh,
trying to learn it. And so then he says like, "Oh, and now we're supposed to think of them as human. Like, how am I supposed to change my mind?" I'm like, just do it. Like, just be decent. Just like use your brain for 2 seconds and your empathy. And I think too, he's so back there still. And we see that Arthur is as well because he tells this fantastic, like, just, I mean, the story is very tragic, but like, just George Takei is such a phenomenal actor and he really gets to shine in this moment when he's telling the story because he was 4 years old when Pearl Harbor was bombed. And he first paints his father as a war hero and says, oh, he was constructing the harbor and he was killed, quote, watching men of his own race destroy what he had built with his own hands. But then, as we're starting to learn more about their backstories, they're both kind of telling their own sides of the war. He Arthur starts to break down and is just like sobbing and like really just like going through it. And he says that his father was a traitor, actually, and that he signaled the planes and showed where to drop the bombs. And so I just think that is like it really adds this depth and this dynamic that I didn't expect from the episode. Again, Twilight Zone always changing what I'm thinking is going to happen. But yeah, it's so important to hear the story, but like this vet doesn't really listen in the way that he needs to. He's
oh, we lost her. She'll come back. She's like in the throes of the Wi-Fi issues. Um, but yeah, I know what she's saying. Um, oh, you're back. Okay,
Hi,
keep
sorry
going.
about that. So sorry. So yeah, I feel like they're both, have these flaws, whether it's within their families or within themselves. But neither of them, I mean, I don't know. I just think that they can't come to an actual understanding because they're not listening in the way that they need to be. And even though they're having this conversation and it's good, they're not like, just yelling at each other. They still have this inherent distrust of one another, I think, is what it boils down to.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, there's elements of danger throughout the episode, and I was just feeling terrible for Arthur because he's trying to leave and he goes down and the door is shut, and there's not even
Oh,
a lock on the door, and it's
freaky.
just shut. And I was like, this, I mean, this is like a form of like trauma, like this is fear. It's like you're trapped in this attic with this man who like fundamentally hates your race. Like
Yeah.
it's like high possibility of a hate crime about to occur.
Mhm.
I was like my heart was pounding for him.
Totally. That was scary. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really scary. And I wanna wrap this up because we've been going for almost 90 minutes
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to talk about the ending of this episode. Oh yeah, get out, Giraffe says. I don't think she's talking to us. So it's time to get out. But yeah, I was absolutely thinking of the Jordan Peele movie, Get Out.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's the same
scary.
kind of
Yeah.
absolutely same kind of thing where it's like they're mentally and physically unable to escape the conditions that the war put them in, and even 20 years out, they're still unable to break that, like, cycle of hate.
Yeah, well, have we broken the cycle of hate? I don't think so. It doesn't. It takes more than 20 years.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, but in the end, like this sword keeps coming back. The vet has talked about how he keeps selling the sword off, and it comes back to him, or he throws it in the trash, and the garbage man's like, "Hey, did you leave this in the trash can?" And
Yeah.
no matter what he does, it keeps haunting him, and it keeps coming back. And throughout their conversation, Arthur has continued to be drawn towards the sword, and he keeps picking it up and staring at it. And every time, everyone's waiting, like, what's going to happen with the sword? And
Mhm.
then finally, at the end, there's like a struggle. The sword is like under the desk, and then the vet gets like shoved into it.
Yeah.
We don't see it because it's like PG.
Yeah. It's the 60s, yeah.
But like we know, like it was art, like the vet, he was killed with the sword. And then we see
Yes.
Arthur pick it up and he yells bonsai and he jumps
Mhm.
out of the attic window to
Yeah.
his death because they're in the attic.
Yeah. This was just a, like, completely shocking ending. I mean, I knew
Yeah.
something was gonna happen with the sword, obviously, but we remember the inscription said, "The sword will avenge me," and the owner of the sword was shot while surrendering, and so this was the final, being avenged finally, and the sort of like completion of this swords and this owner of the sword's journey. Um, Horrible that it ended that way. And I think what Rod Serling said at the end is really perfect. He says their common bond and their common enemy, guilt.
Haha. Yep. Well, and the part that gets me too, sorry, so stuffy.
Yeah, it's really
The
good.
part that gets me at the end is the door after they're both dead just just opens up a little bit as if it wasn't locked at all. Even though we saw both of them attempt
Like
to
trying to
open the
wrench it
door,
open. Hmm.
it makes me think like, I mean, we're in the Twilight Zone, obviously, so who knows what's
Hmm.
going on, but it's like the sword was controlling, like, Arthur, you can't leave yet because you haven't avenged the vet,
Yeah.
or it was a subconscious thing where both of them were like, this act, the scene is not complete yet, so you can't leave.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That was just woo, chills, very spooky vibes. Yeah, so
Wow.
this was so, so epic. I am really glad we got to talk about this. It feels so fun to do like a whole different style of show, and just talk about something so different from Trek, but also so familiar still. I love that the themes of the Twilight Zone and the attention to what's important, like racial dynamics, human rights, all of that kind of stuff, is carried on into Star Trek, and that Roddenberry really wanted to continue to create a world in which you could look at sci-fi through these other lenses and understand humanity better.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just can't believe a show that was created so long ago still holds up so well today, and
Yeah.
it's a pleasure talking about it with you, Rihanna. And I can't wait to talk about the Next Generation spooky episodes tomorrow, and then that will be released next week. Just so excited. Thank you
Yes.
all for watching today. This is part one of our spooky live streams for Halloween. Tune in next week at the same time, but make sure you have a pumpkin, make sure you have a carving knife, and we are going to be making some Trek. Well, I'm going to make a Trek theme pumpkin.
Oh,
I
of course,
assume you
same.
will,
Yes.
Savannah. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So can't wait. That's going to be a Q&A. So we're just going to be like mostly hanging out. It's not going to be so like essay focused
Yeah,
as
not gonna be
most
as philosophical, but
as most of our conversations are. I'm seeing comments. Like Michelle will be carving too. So
yay.
can't wait. I wish we could do a just like a Zoom meeting with everyone.
Right? A little webinar, a carving webinar.
Everyone like post your pictures of pumpkins.
Yes.
Um,
Well, we
yeah,
can. Yeah.
yeah, we
So,
can. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you, and we will see you next week. And you will listen to us this week. We have 2 pods coming out, so woohoo!
yes, get your ears ready. And
Get your
thank
ears
you so
ready.
much, Ashlyn. Live long and prosper. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend and a very spooky weekend.
DeForest Kelly says thank you for watching.
Bye.
All right, goodbye, everybody. Have a good night.